What if the very tools we rely on to advance our lives are inadvertently fueling some of the most destructive disasters of our time? When wildfires swept through Los Angeles, scorching thousands of acres and leaving countless families displaced, one figure noticed something others didn't. Elon Musk's involvement wasn't just about offering resources, it sparked a deeper investigation into why these wildfires were escalating so quickly. Could technology not only reveal the causes but also become the solution? And how far could innovation go in combating a crisis like this? Let's explore this in detail. The California sun was unrelenting, its rays piercing through the hazy skies over Los Angeles, where dry winds whispered through brittle trees and parched hills. It was the perfect setup for disaster. The city had weathered wildfire seasons before, but the ominous warnings from meteorologists this year carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Drought conditions had persisted longer than usual. Vegetation had withered into a flammable tinderbox, and strong winds turned the hills into a dangerous powder keg. Then, one afternoon, the inevitable happened. News broke of a wildfire near the outskirts of the city. At first, it seemed routine, another tragic headline in a region long accustomed to these seasonal dangers. But within hours, the flames swelled beyond control, fueled by an unforgiving combination of environmental conditions. Helicopter footage broadcast across news networks revealed the enormity of the fire's scale. Roaring flames leaping across ridges, engulfing neighborhoods, and sending dense clouds of smoke billowing into the sky. As the fire's path became more erratic, it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary wildfire. In Hawthorne, at the headquarters of SpaceX, the fire's progression didn't go unnoticed. While the immediate focus of Musk's companies often centered on ambitious projects like space exploration and sustainable energy, the wildfire posed a more urgent, earthbound challenge. Some Tesla facilities were within range of the fire's creeping perimeter, and employees living nearby were being forced to evacuate. Engineers and analysts on site began monitoring the situation, their attention shifting from day-to-day operations to the unfolding crisis. Elon Musk had often spoken publicly about wildfires, their growing intensity, and the systemic issues underlying them. As the wildfire raged, he drew on his previous critiques of environmental regulations that restricted proactive forest management. While policies aimed at conservation were undoubtedly important, they had, in some cases, created unintended consequences. One issue Musk had highlighted was the inability to clear dead vegetation and undergrowth, both highly combustible fuel sources, due to strict regulations. Over time, these practices allowed forests and surrounding areas to become tinderboxes, setting the stage for larger, more destructive fires. This wildfire was no exception. Satellite data collected from SpaceX's Starlink network revealed troubling patterns. Many ignition points aligned with areas densely packed with vegetation that hadn't been cleared. The fire didn't merely consume these areas, it thrived on them, spreading more rapidly than responders could manage. While natural conditions like the dry heat and high winds exacerbated the blaze, the buildup of fuel from unchecked vegetation made the fire nearly impossible to contain. Adding to the complexity was the role of aging infrastructure. Musk's team cross-referenced the fire's origin points with records of utility lines in the area. What they found wasn't surprising. Many of the areas where the fire first ignited were near power lines flagged for maintenance. Historical data showed a pattern of deferred upgrades and limited inspections, leaving the region's electrical grid vulnerable. When combined with the environmental conditions, it was a recipe for disaster. By late afternoon, it was evident that the wildfire had exposed a collision of systemic failures. Outdated infrastructure, insufficient forest management, and a rapidly changing climate were converging to create a perfect storm. Musk, known for his solutions-oriented mindset, had long advocated for addressing these root causes through a combination of practical policy changes and technological innovation. His company's tools, from Starlink satellites to Tesla energy systems, were already being deployed to provide immediate relief. Starlink terminals were sent to evacuation zones and command centers to restore communication networks overwhelmed by the fire, while Tesla Cybertrucks equipped with mobile Wi-Fi and charging stations were stationed in remote areas to assist displaced residents and emergency teams. But Musk's focus went beyond addressing the immediate crisis. As thermal imaging data streamed in from satellites, his teams noticed something strange: irregularities in the fire's spread. While wildfires are inherently unpredictable, the fire's behavior raised questions. Some areas of dense vegetation remained untouched, while others burned aggressively despite seemingly similar conditions. These anomalies hinted at the possibility that modern materials or preventative measures might be playing a role. In areas with newer developments, fire-resistant building materials and proactive landscaping strategies may have helped slow the flames. This observation spurred a broader investigation. Musk's engineers began overlaying fire progression data with maps of recent construction projects, zoning regulations, and vegetation management plans. What emerged was a clearer picture. While systemic failures had exacerbated the fire's intensity, targeted interventions had also provided pockets of resistance. Some communities had invested in fireproofing their homes and implementing vegetation control programs, creating small but crucial buffers against the blaze. These successes, while limited, underscored the potential of combining policy reform and technology to reduce wildfire risks. As evening fell, the crisis deepened. The fire had grown beyond the scope of traditional containment methods, forcing emergency responders to make tough decisions about which areas to prioritize. The Starlink terminals and Tesla Cybertrucks continued to play a vital role in supporting communication and evacuation efforts. For residents in the affected zones, access to reliable internet meant receiving real-time updates and staying connected with loved ones. These tools weren't solutions in themselves, but they provided a lifeline during a moment of chaos. By now, the challenges of the wildfire had extended beyond the immediate danger of flames. Questions loomed about how to prevent such disasters in the future. While the discussion about environmental regulations had been ongoing for years, Musk's observations brought renewed attention to the issue. Could conservation efforts be balanced with practical forest management practices? Would allowing controlled burns and clearing dead vegetation significantly reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires? And how could technology like satellite imaging and predictive modeling be scaled to address these challenges on a global level? The answers weren't simple, but the urgency of finding them had never been clearer. The fire's rapid escalation was a wake-up call, not just for California, but for all regions grappling with the growing impacts of climate change. As the wildfire continued to burn, it left behind more than destruction. It sparked a critical conversation about the intersection of policy, infrastructure, and innovation. In the hours that followed, teams at SpaceX and Tesla remained focused on gathering data and refining their models. The crisis had revealed vulnerabilities that required immediate attention, but also opportunities for improvement. Musk's teams were already discussing how tools like Starlink could be integrated into long-term disaster management plans, from early warning systems to post-crisis recovery efforts. The night stretched on, the glow of the wildfire visible from miles away. For those watching from the hillsides or the command centers, it was a stark reminder of the challenges ahead. Yet amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope, the potential of technology, the strength of communities, and the determination to prevent future disasters. As the sun rose over Los Angeles the next day, these efforts would take on even greater significance, setting the stage for deeper investigations and broader collaborations. The next morning brought little relief as the fire's erratic behavior and relentless pace continued to baffle responders. But now, with clearer data and emerging patterns, those tasked with managing the crisis had a sharper understanding of what they were up against. At SpaceX, the focus shifted to analyzing the irregularities further, identifying the vulnerabilities in infrastructure and the potential impact of innovative approaches. It was the beginning of a deeper exploration into how systemic change could redefine the future of wildfire prevention. As night fell over Los Angeles, the wildfire continued its relentless advance, casting an eerie glow on the horizon. Emergency services worked tirelessly, but the sheer speed and intensity of the fire made it difficult to contain. The city's residents anxiously monitored updates, many preparing for the possibility of evacuation. Meanwhile, in Hawthorne, engineers and analysts at SpaceX and Tesla remained focused on understanding the fire's behavior. The thermal imaging data collected earlier in the day raised more questions than answers. The irregular patterns of the fire's spread seemed unusual, defying the expected pathways dictated by wind direction and terrain. While wildfires are inherently unpredictable, the data suggested something else might be at play. With the images still fresh in their minds, the teams began to dig deeper. They started by cross-referencing the thermal data with other variables, including vegetation density, topographical maps, and historical wind patterns. What they found was striking. Several hotspots coincided with areas known to have aging power lines. These locations had been flagged in previous safety reports for overdue maintenance, a fact that highlighted the vulnerabilities in California's infrastructure. Yet even this didn't fully explain the anomalies. One anomaly stood out: a cluster of hotspots that didn't align with any significant vegetation or infrastructure. The area, visible in both the thermal and aerial imagery, appeared to have been bypassed by the fire entirely, despite being surrounded by flames. This prompted further investigation. The team reviewed building materials, fire-resistant treatments, and zoning policies in the region, hypothesizing that newer developments might have incorporated advanced safety measures. As the data poured in, the team's efforts began to gain momentum. They reached out to local fire departments and environmental experts, hoping to corroborate their findings with on-the-ground observations. Initial feedback suggested that some of the areas withstanding the fire had indeed benefited from modern fire-resistant construction materials and proactive vegetation management. While not a complete solution, these measures had undoubtedly made a difference, slowing the fire's progress and creating barriers that allowed firefighters more time to respond. The focus then shifted to understanding the role of these modern approaches. Could the principles used in these resistant areas be scaled up or adapted for broader application? This question spurred discussions among engineers, scientists, and local authorities about the integration of advanced materials and technology in future urban planning. In the midst of this analysis, another pressing challenge arose. Communication networks in the affected areas had begun to fail, further complicating emergency response efforts. Cellular towers were overwhelmed, and power outages made traditional landlines unreliable. This was a critical issue. Without reliable communication, coordination among firefighting teams and evacuation orders would be severely hindered. Recognizing this gap, the team expedited plans to deploy Starlink terminals to the hardest-hit areas. These terminals, designed to provide high-speed internet even in remote locations, could restore connectivity where it was most needed. By early morning, the first units were en route to emergency command centers and evacuation sites, providing a lifeline for responders and residents alike. As the day progressed, the team remained acutely aware of the growing stakes. Reports from the ground painted a grim picture: firefighters battling flames that were jumping containment lines, families fleeing their homes with only minutes to spare, and wildlife habitats reduced to ash. The urgency of the situation pushed everyone to act swiftly, but also thoughtfully, ensuring their efforts were as effective as possible. Among the many data points being analyzed, one theme became increasingly clear. While the immediate focus was on containing the current wildfire, the broader challenge lay in addressing the systemic issues that made such disasters so devastating. Aging infrastructure, insufficient maintenance, and a lack of proactive planning were recurring factors in the data. These problems weren't new, but the wildfire had brought them into sharp focus, demanding attention and solutions. The team began to consider how their resources and expertise could be leveraged beyond the immediate crisis. Ideas ranged from real-time monitoring systems that combined satellite imagery with AI-driven predictive models to localized fire prevention strategies tailored to high-risk areas. These discussions were still theoretical, but the consensus was clear. Innovation had to play a central role in preventing future disasters. As evening approached, the fire's intensity showed no signs of waning. The data streams continued to flow, painting a stark picture of the challenges ahead. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was also a sense of determination. The insights gained over the past 24 hours had not only informed the immediate response, but also laid the groundwork for a future where such disasters could be mitigated more effectively. For the engineers and analysts working late into the night, this wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a call to action. Every piece of data, every map overlay, and every deployment of technology was part of a larger effort to turn the tide against an overwhelming force. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were committed to finding a way forward. The morning brought no respite as the wildfire continued its relentless advance. Thick smoke hung over Los Angeles, casting a dim, hazy light that felt unnatural. Emergency responders were stretched thin, coordinating efforts to contain the flames and protect vulnerable communities. Yet the challenges were mounting. With communication infrastructure compromised, keeping evacuation zones organized and relaying critical updates had become increasingly difficult. Starlink terminals delivered overnight to key locations began to make a difference. Emergency operations centers reported smoother coordination as reliable internet connectivity was restored. Evacuation centers and field responders, equipped with Tesla Cybertrucks and mobile hotspots, were able to send and receive updates more effectively. These technological interventions provided a much-needed lifeline, though the situation on the ground remained dire. Back at Hawthorne, analysts continued poring over data, seeking patterns that could provide actionable insights. Among the heat maps and terrain overlays, the anomalies in fire behavior remained a focal point. Several regions had seemingly resisted the flames, forming a patchwork of untouched areas amid a sea of destruction. Upon closer examination, these zones revealed commonalities: updated infrastructure, effective vegetation management, and in some cases, the use of fire-resistant materials. This discovery prompted new discussions. Could these methods be scaled across broader regions? Would a more comprehensive approach to urban planning and development mitigate future wildfire risks? The team debated these questions as they worked to refine their analysis. Engineers began drafting concepts for an integrated system, a network of predictive tools and preventative measures that could help communities prepare for and respond to wildfires more effectively. As the hours passed, reports from the field highlighted the fire's growing unpredictability. Shifting winds caused sudden flare-ups, forcing firefighters to adjust strategies on the fly. In one instance, a firebreak, a deliberately cleared area meant to halt the fire's progress, failed to hold, overwhelmed by the intensity of the flames. It was a stark reminder of the wildfire's power and the limitations of traditional methods. The challenges underscored the need for innovative solutions. Using Starlink's live imaging data, the team began mapping wind changes in real time, overlaying this information onto fire progression models. This allowed responders on the ground to anticipate new hotspots and redirect efforts accordingly. While the technology wasn't flawless, it demonstrated the potential of leveraging real-time data to stay ahead of the crisis. Meanwhile, local officials acknowledged the growing evidence of infrastructure failures contributing to the wildfire's severity. Power companies were once again in the spotlight, with records revealing that aging equipment and overdue maintenance had likely played a role in sparking the initial blaze. Public frustration mounted, fueling demands for accountability and systemic reform. In parallel, conversations about the role of technology in wildfire management gained traction. Community leaders, environmental scientists, and emergency responders began to recognize the value of integrating tools like satellite imaging, AI-driven models, and advanced materials into future preparedness plans. These discussions were still in their infancy, but they represented a shift in thinking, one that embraced innovation alongside traditional approaches. By late afternoon, the team at Hawthorne shifted its focus to immediate needs. Using thermal imaging data and predictive algorithms, they identified areas at high risk of flare-ups and relayed this information to firefighters. Drones equipped with thermal cameras were deployed to monitor critical zones, providing a bird's-eye view of the evolving situation. While the drones were primarily used for observation, their presence gave responders a tactical advantage, helping to prioritize resources and protect lives. On the ground, the technology was making an impact. In one affected neighborhood, firefighters used Starlink terminals to coordinate an evacuation, ensuring residents were moved to safety before the flames reached their homes. The combination of high-tech tools and human effort created a glimmer of hope, even as the wildfire continued to test the city's resilience. As evening approached, the enormity of the challenge became increasingly clear. The wildfire wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a symptom of deeper issues: climate change, infrastructure neglect, and the growing complexity of urban ecosystems. Addressing these challenges would require more than quick fixes. It would demand sustained collaboration and a commitment to innovation. At Hawthorne, the team worked late into the night, refining their models and brainstorming new approaches. The data they had gathered over the past few days painted a stark picture of vulnerabilities but also pointed to potential solutions. It was a race against time, not just to contain the current wildfire, but to lay the groundwork for a more resilient future. For those on the front lines, both in the field and behind the screens, the work was far from over. As the wildfire raged into its fourth day, exhaustion began to take its toll on the firefighters and emergency personnel working tirelessly to contain it. The blaze had already scorched thousands of acres, forcing families from their homes and turning entire neighborhoods into smoldering ruins. Smoke continued to cloud the skies, making the air thick and unbreathable for those remaining in the affected areas. Emergency operations, supported by Starlink's restored communication network, began to stabilize in key regions. Firefighters reported improved coordination, using the connectivity to relay updates and adjust strategies in real time. Meanwhile, the Tesla Cybertrucks deployed to evacuation zones provided not only mobile internet, but also a means for displaced residents to charge devices and stay connected with loved ones. At the Hawthorne office, the data team remained focused on understanding the fire's behavior. The previous findings about aging power lines and the role of infrastructure failures had prompted more scrutiny. Analysts reviewed historical maintenance records and regional zoning plans, uncovering patterns that suggested systemic neglect in areas deemed low priority for upgrades. These findings pointed to the need for broader infrastructure reforms, but they offered little relief for the immediate crisis. In parallel, the engineering team worked on refining real-time fire mapping using Starlink's satellite imagery. By integrating this data with AI-driven predictive models, they aimed to anticipate how the fire would spread based on changing wind patterns, terrain, and fuel availability. Early iterations of the model began showing promising results, providing emergency responders with a clearer picture of potential hotspots. Despite these advancements, the fire's unpredictability remained a formidable challenge. A sudden shift in the wind late in the afternoon caused the flames to jump a containment line, threatening a densely populated suburban area. The situation demanded immediate action. Firefighters scrambled to set up additional fire breaks while residents in the threatened neighborhoods were ordered to evacuate. The Hawthorne team worked quickly to assist. Using updated satellite imagery, they pinpointed critical areas where resources could be deployed most effectively. Drones equipped with thermal cameras were dispatched to monitor the advancing flames and identify vulnerabilities in the containment line. While the drones were not equipped to extinguish fires directly, their ability to provide live footage from the front lines proved invaluable. In one neighborhood, the drone's real-time data alerted firefighters to a vulnerable stretch of homes that had yet to be evacuated. Using the Starlink network, responders coordinated with local law enforcement to expedite the evacuation, ensuring that no one was left behind as the fire closed in. These efforts highlighted the potential of combining advanced technology with human expertise, even in the most chaotic circumstances. As evening fell, the fire approached the outskirts of the suburban area. Firefighters, now reinforced with additional personnel and equipment, worked relentlessly to halt its progress. The combination of updated mapping, drone surveillance, and real-time communication allowed them to focus their efforts with precision. By midnight, the advancing flames had been slowed, though the threat was far from over. Throughout the night, the Hawthorne team remained on high alert. The urgency of the situation pushed them to refine their predictive models further, incorporating new variables like humidity levels and wind speed fluctuations. Every update to the model was shared with ground teams, enabling them to adapt their strategies in near real time. The crisis underscored the importance of preparation and adaptability. While technology played a crucial role in mitigating the disaster, it was clear that systemic changes were needed to prevent similar events in the future. Discussions among the team turned to the long-term implications of their work. Could this technology be scaled to monitor high-risk areas across the globe? How could communities be better equipped to withstand the growing threat of wildfires? These questions lingered as the team continued their efforts. The fire was far from contained, but the tools and strategies developed in those intense hours had already begun to make a tangible difference. For those working on the front lines and behind the scenes, the battle against the flames was as much about survival as it was about innovation. Every step forward, however small, brought them closer to a safer future. By the fifth day, the wildfire had left a deep scar across the Los Angeles hills. But the relentless efforts of emergency teams and the integration of advanced technologies were beginning to turn the tide. Smoke continued to cloud the horizon, but for the first time, there was a sense of cautious optimism. Containment efforts had succeeded in slowing the fire's advance, preventing it from reaching critical infrastructure and densely populated neighborhoods. In the command centers, the data streams from Starlink satellites and drones painted a clearer picture of the fire's behavior. Patterns that had once seemed erratic now showed signs of predictability, thanks to continuous refinements in the AI-driven models. These tools allowed responders to anticipate flare-ups, allocate resources more efficiently, and focus efforts on areas at the greatest risk. On the ground, firefighters worked tirelessly to reinforce containment lines. They relied on the real-time updates from the Hawthorne team, who monitored conditions from afar and relayed critical information. The seamless integration of technology and traditional firefighting methods highlighted the potential for innovation to enhance disaster response. Amid the operational successes, the human cost of the wildfire became increasingly evident. Entire communities had been displaced, with some families returning to find their homes reduced to ash. The stories of resilience and loss began to surface, painting a vivid picture of the disaster's impact. In one instance, a family shared how a Starlink-enabled communication hub had allowed them to contact loved ones and receive evacuation instructions just in time. These personal accounts underscored the importance of connectivity in moments of crisis. As containment efforts continued, attention shifted toward recovery and rebuilding. Discussions emerged about how to address the systemic vulnerabilities that had exacerbated the wildfire's destruction. The role of aging infrastructure, inadequate maintenance, and limited preventative measures became central to these conversations. Public officials, environmental experts, and community leaders began to advocate for comprehensive reforms, including stricter regulations on power companies and increased investment in fire-resistant technologies. In Hawthorne, the team reflected on the lessons learned from the crisis. The tools they had developed and deployed over the past week had proven effective, but there was still room for improvement. Ideas for enhancing the predictive models, expanding drone capabilities, and scaling the technology to other regions were already taking shape. The wildfire had exposed the urgent need for proactive solutions, not just in California, but in fire-prone areas around the world. The immediate crisis began to subside as firefighters gained control over the remaining flames. By the seventh day, the wildfire was largely contained, thanks to the coordinated efforts of emergency responders, community volunteers, and the technological support provided by Tesla and SpaceX. The containment was a hard-fought victory, but it came with a sobering reminder of the growing challenges posed by climate change and human activity. Elon Musk's companies received recognition for their contributions, particularly the deployment of Starlink terminals and Cybertrucks, which had provided crucial support during the crisis. However, the narrative quickly shifted to focus on the broader implications of the wildfire. Media outlets highlighted the importance of modernizing infrastructure, improving preparedness, and leveraging technology to mitigate future disasters. In the days following the containment, Musk's team announced plans to expand their efforts in wildfire prevention and response. Proposals included the development of a global monitoring system that combined satellite imagery, predictive modeling, and localized fire suppression technologies. The goal was ambitious: to create a network capable of identifying and addressing wildfire risks before they escalated into full-scale disasters. As the city began to rebuild, the collaboration between innovators, responders, and communities served as a testament to the power of collective action. The wildfire had tested the limits of human and technological ingenuity, but it had also demonstrated what could be achieved when people came together in the face of adversity. While the scars of the disaster would take time to heal, the lessons learned promised to shape a more resilient future for Los Angeles and beyond. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.